Oh, yeah, see, when you're doing television and it's live and it's over the air, we always have to do what we just did, the warning about the S word. You know what? We're going to be doing an hour about people doing it, okay? And that's one of the reasons why it is. It's because of all the people who are blushing, but they are with us because there's probably no one out there who really genuinely says, I don't need information on this subject. Are you kidding?
I know.
And besides that, who's going to tell me? How about if we find out? Yes. If you'll introduce yourself, sir, by name and by professional title.
My name is Robert Pell, and I'm the Children's Justice Coordinator in Maricopa County, and I work for Child Help.
And what does that mean? I know what Child Help means. What does the Justice Coordinator mean?
I work with the different professionals that are involved in child abuse investigations. So to make sure that we basically all work together in a coordinated fashion to provide the best outcomes possible for the children that have experienced child abuse.
And if we do anything with this hour is help the kids, well, then it's been a successful hour. Hello, welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be here. I'm Dr. Angela DeRosa, and I'm an internal medicine specialist, but I really specialize in bioidentical hormonal health for men and women.
And so that has something to do with the ups and downs of our lives, huh?
Figuratively and literally, yes.
There you go.
And hello.
Hello. My name is Dr. Morgan Francis, and I'm a mental health therapist, and I treat individuals that are going through difficult problems, and my specialties are body image and sexual addiction.
Wow.
Yes, well, listen, that has been our problem, of course, for a number of years now.
Well, speak for
no
yourself
matter
there,
what.
Pat.
Excuse me. Okay, listen, let's start off with pop culture anyway, because it is always a subject, sex is always a subject of virtually every facet of pop culture. Music and movies and plays and literature, of course, 50 Shades of Grey. I can't think of 1 hour in media that somehow this isn't brought up. But I want to find out what your feelings are as professionals about why the hysteria, and why the hysteria primarily seems to be among women as opposed to men's extreme enthusiasm for this book.
Well, it has been quite the story, hasn't it? And it's been very exciting, and I think that the characters really are very profound. You have Christian Grey, who is this very handsome man that comes from a very well-to-do background, and he has this secret of getting involved with bondage and S&M, and that's a very taboo topic for individual readers. And romance novels have been around for a really long time, but I think we're seeing it come forward into pop culture due to the characters and their roles in this novel.
But this is romance with handcuffs.
Yeah.
Yes.
And what woman wouldn't like that?
Well, we seem to be finding out. No, but we seem to be finding out that far more women than we ever imagined are not only interested but voraciously buying this this troika of very expensive novels.
Well, what's interesting is I have a lot of older patients who are still sexually active in their 60s, 70s, and 80s who we have properly hormonally balanced so that they have that desire for sex. And I actually had an older woman just the other day say, you know, honey, we used to do this kind of stuff long before this book ever came out. It's just more talked about now.
Oh my gosh.
This isn't news. This is just that I think our society is more comfortable talking about it, in particular with women and sexuality.
And with a guy immediately to your right that I'm going to be talking to in just a moment, why is it that it seems that we're only talking about women going to these book signings and having clubs and gathering as huge groups of S&M groupies? Why so many women and so few guys?
Well, I think it's intimidating to men. I mean, this is largely a woman's coming-of-age story, and men can be largely intimidated by this book. I also have concerns that in some ways, and I'd love your thoughts on this, is that this sets up really high expectations for men and sexuality. Not only this man is highly educated, very, very wealthy, extremely good-looking, and he just happens to be this wonderful lover, even though he goes off onto the dark side a bit, is still very pleasing for this woman. And most men cannot go to that effect, so I think it's a bit discouraging maybe for them and intimidating. And also men, they've largely had Playboy, Playgirl, they've had their outlets for years. And I think this is finally our women's coming of age in order to have that kind of something to latch onto that talks about their sexuality.
But aren't men clearly benefiting from this book? I mean, you hear more and more like, oh, my wife can't keep her hands off of me. I mean, so I'm surprised that more men aren't reading this book. So they have like a little guide of, wow, she really liked that part of it.
You bring up a really good point, Lisa. And actually, I encourage men to read this book, because what Christian Grey does so well is that he plans and he thinks ahead, and he's able to make Anastasia feel the most beautiful woman and the most desirable woman that he's ever come encounter with. And isn't that what we all want as women, to feel desirable, to feel wanted? So I think that men could take some tips from Christian Grey.
I also think it's a little bit assuming to say that it's just women. I think men also want to feel that way too. I think it's human nature to want to feel cared for, someone that's taken the time and thought and energy to go through that kind of desire to create that environment for them.
Well, Bob, do you feel intimidated so far?
Are you turning 50 Shades of Red?
Yeah, you know, I was kind of joking before starting that it was going to be a problem of turning 50 Shades of Red this morning for me. You know, I think that they all have valid points. One thing that I think hasn't been kind of brought up yet is that the medium involved is important here. And as much as it pains me to say it because I'm an avid reader, but the fact that this is in literature is possibly one of the factors that it's more popular right now with women than it is with men. As you noted, you know, men have had outlets in various different forms for a long time now, and reading isn't necessarily a lot of men's most favorite way to stimulate thought.
Why?
Wow, I don't know, because I enjoy reading it. I haven't read the book yet, but I enjoy reading.
When I was a kid, it was National Geographic that was as close to erotica as you could possibly get. But the idea, though, it was still because of the pictures from Nigeria.
And it may be that men tend to be a little bit more visually oriented.
Oh, yes. From a biology standpoint.
Yes, we are.
They are visual learners, and their erotic is stimulated for visual, or women is more about description, and they're more
Well, and I think too, when
turned
you're
on
reading,
by reading.
yeah, it's more of like our own little theater of the mind, and you know, and here we become the characters in the book, where the men have to, you know, see it, touch it, feel it.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But is that true, though? Is it true that women are actually turned off by pornography, by films, by X-rated films, and so on? I have heard that recently, with the new sense of freedom, that there are more and more women who are actually buying these films for use at home than ever before.
In my experience, no, women are not against pornography. In fact, some of my clients that are females engage in pornographic use. I think, you know, it's just not as talked about. It's not in the pop culture. I mean, we're seeing Magic Mike now come forward, and that is not pornographic in the sense of, you know, being in the internet, but it's also showcasing men as objects, sexual objects. And women are buying tickets and going, and it was one of the biggest movies in the box office over the weekend.
We got to find out about Magic Mike when we get back, because one of the questions I have always wanted to ask, and I get to today, I've always wanted to find out why there is such tremendous enthusiasm with this audience of women with those kinds of shows, the Chippendales and Thunder Down Under and Magic Mike. And you go to a club where it's guys watching women, and you talk about a bunch of perv-looking guys. I want to find out why, the difference between men and women when it comes to entertainment like that. You aren't going anywhere, right? You cancel the 9 o'clock. This is Pat McMahon and Lisa, the Morning Scramble.
I'm sweating.
Okay, we're talking about having triplets and how that certainly enhances one's erotic life.
Oh, it's crazy at our house. Yeah, we have, you know, that libido is going crazy, let me tell you.
Hey, you know what? We never really officially introduced you, and there are people who just got here from Zelman, Utah.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lisa Schneider-Cipriano, and happy holidays.
Yeah, absolutely. We're celebrating our holiday horizontally.
Yeah.
It's very important that I think when you talk about sex, you don't do this business and you don't do this business. You just have a conversation with grown-ups and find out about what other grown-ups are doing and why. And we have a panel of authorities on the subject. Dr. Morgan, if you will, would you at least kick off the Magic Mike segment of this show? Yeah. I have seen both of these audiences, and I want to tell you, as a lifetime I have spent in entertainment, I have never seen the difference in two genders in an entertainment mode than this. Women going crazy on the screen with Magic Mike, and also with the shows themselves. And they're going crazy. They've brought friends. They're stuffing money in the guys' gazette, right? Yeah. And guys at strip clubs are going like,
I'm doing something naughty.
I like it. Tell me, what's the difference?
I think it's an opportunity for women to go have fun. I mean, they get to step out of their roles of being a mom, of being a working person, of being a wife, of being a sister, whatever their main identity is, and they get to go and have a great time with their girlfriends and look at attractive men that are doing sexual things on a stage. And that's fun, and it's pleasuring. And the characters, the actors in Magic Mike are pretty nice to look at, if you ask me.
Yeah, well, why aren't guys having as much fun in their clubs?
I think in strip clubs where women are performing on stage and men are the customer, I think it's more they take a backseat approach where it's you are there to entertain me, to do it. I just got off of work, or I'm tired from a long day. I want to relax and watch this beautiful image up on the stage and be erotic. So I think it's a different approach, but when you take away all the layers, it's the same thing. It's finding something pleasurable, that's sexual, that's objectifying in front of you.
Dr. Angela, chime in here. Have you ever been in one of those clubs?
I have to admit, I'm sorry, Mom. Yes, I have.
To both?
I have been to both. Interestingly, I find the environments quite different. And when I used to live in Detroit, we'd always go over to Windsor. Yep. And Windsor actually, they had
Windsor Ballet.
The Windsor Ballet, exactly, where that men could actually do full frontal. And I know it was. But you know what's interesting, when you look at women in those types of clubs, I think they're less turned on because everything's so out. Let's say just out there. Where when you go to places like Chippendales, you have some of that allure of fantasy, and you don't have everything right in your face, literally and figuratively.
And like you were saying, it's the girlfriends going out and having fun. It's like being giddy.
It's social.
And it's, in a way, too, it's social, and I think it's safe versus when a man goes to
it's
a
very
topless.
one-on-one.
It's one-on-one, and again, the visual, like Robert said, is right there. And sure, the Chippendales is visual, too, but it's like, oh, is he going to let me put that dollar in that little Speedo? And exactly.
Yeah, I still find the atmosphere, I have to tell you, I'm sorry, Mom, but this makes me perhaps a little wussy. I have only been to a couple of strip clubs, and then to do interviews with the dancers. Is there anything less sexual than that? But you look around, and it's eerie. I mean, it's really a kind of a creepy place. I won't even ask you, sir. But you might give us a professional attitude as to why the difference.
I think that there are certain social stigmas that may be placed on with men at a gentleman's club, for instance.
But not for women?
Less for women, and I'll point out an illustration is that you'll never see a billboard in downtown Phoenix advertising a female review of that type coming into like you would for instance the Thunder Down Under. Yeah. So when you look around your community, there's that stigma that only guys that are dark and seedy would go to that type of establishment. So
but
is it a self-fulfilling prophecy at that point?
But doesn't the establishment perceive that with, I mean, I get the black light, so the woman can have the perfect body and the perfect legs and everything, but just the whole aura. I mean, it's not like the lights flashing and the mirror ball going around, and you have the upbeat music, but it's that whole almost underground.
It's cheesy.
Well, yeah. Thunder Down Under you're right. It's a spectacle. It's a show. I mean, there's characters, there's different scenes, there's lots of music, there's lights. You have to buy a ticket to go to it. When you go to a strip club, there's no tickets to be purchased. You're there to escape reality, because whatever's going on in your reality is boring, it's uncomfortable, or you just don't prefer. And so this is a way for you to get away and fantasize with the sexual attractive female object on stage.
I'm glad you felt that the Thunder Down Under review was somewhat appealing because they made me dance with them here in the studio.
Yes, it was classic.
And I was thinking about going on the road, even though I was not asked. I wanted to know. So, by the way, talking about the ads that you brought up, the billboards and so on, why is it that in men's magazines and pictorial presentations in general, you will almost always see two women or more in sexual situations, and you never will ever see two men or more, even in women's magazines?
Well, I don't have the answer for that, and I would
Why
have
are
to
you
defer.
here, sir? We invited you here for answers. But isn't that peculiar? I mean, you open
Sure.
up the standard men's magazines, Hustler or any of those things. There's almost always the group study, and it's almost always a group of women. And I think most guys find that tremendously attractive and would be revolted at the idea of a couple of guys.
Well, I mean, and I'm always hesitant to compare ourselves to other species in the animal kingdom, but you know, it's not uncommon for that to occur in nature. I don't believe where it, you know, you have a male animal might have a harem of female partners that they've fought and they've battled for, and you know,
It's a sign of virility.
Yeah.
I mean, the men can spread their seed amongst multiple women, and it's all about propagating their gene pool.
Yeah, but it's a sign of gay people when it comes to guys, and it's gay people that are rejected by straights. Why is it that we seem to have more men that are homophobic than women?
Well, it's a threat to them. I mean, women, we tend to
See,
be more...
once again, we're intimidated.
You are. I mean, certainly men, they want to be the sole king of their kingdom. And women, we tend to work as communal together, socialize together. Men, they're there to be the sole leader biologically.
Do you feel that it's still a man's world? Hence, when you were talking about the women in the ad like that, and the intimidation factor, is it still a man's world out there?
As much as I'd like to say we are certainly come a long way, it is somewhat of a man's world, but to some degree it needs to still have that balance between men and women, the feminine and the masculine, because the more we neutralize those so that we're so much alike, that sexual tension between us goes away. And I think unfortunately a lot of marriages are struggling with that because men don't know how to be men anymore. They're accused of being wussy, or that they're not, and you are definitely not wussy. But women, where we get that...
Don't suck up to the host. Dr. Angela, you're a professional. You don't need...
But you're my new favorite second husband.
Excuse me, Duffy, if you happen to be watching, I just want you to know it's a highly
New favorite
professional
second
organization. That's right.
Every woman needs a backup.
That's right.
Would you jot that down? Every woman needs a backup. That's the key that's going
right.
into the next segment.
I'm
of
writing
the
that right
Morning
now.
Scramble.
Every
All
woman...
about sex.
Every woman needs... Okay.
This is it. This is the time that we
This is
kick
it.
things off with our panel of authorities, all with a different specialty.
Oh yeah, and you know what? We have been talking about sex this morning. We have addressed 50 Shades of Grey. We've talked about women, men, Chippendales to those topless bars. And so now I'm going to toss out the question of desire and lust. Is there a difference?
Well, in my experience, desire is the early parts of lust. Desire is, you know, you want something, you think about it. It's starting to ruminate or think over and over in your mind. The lust is then the action that's starting to come out. So I'm lusting, so I'm doing things, maybe I'm changing my schedule. Maybe I'm checking up on Facebook about this person. Maybe I'm checking my emails. Maybe I'm calling. Maybe I'm rearranging, you know, my Friday night so I can go out with this person. So it's desire comes first, and then I see the lust come out.
Well, when you think about biology, it was interesting back in the 60s, Masters and Johnsons did a lot of experimentation to figure out the sexual response cycles of both men and women. And it was assumed originally that it was very linear for both. In other words, men always started out where they had that desire, and then they would become aroused, and then the arousal would lead to the sexual act. And they assumed women responded the same way. Well, lo and behold, no, women were different from men, of course. So in the 90s, they really realized that women had a circular sexual response. So it's much more complicated. In other words, early in the relationships, as she's describing, we have the same cycle where we get we have the desire, arousal, and then the act of intimacy. But as time goes on, we become sexually neutral. In other words, that after about a year of a relationship, the oxytocin really kicks in our brain, and we become more of a bonding, where we want to be close and intimate, and we lose that, what we call that horniness or that lust feeling, and now we want to be close. But that puts us in a sexually neutral state, meaning we're not going to anymore go after our sexual desire. We just kind of sit there waiting to be aroused, which then can lead to the desire, which then leads to the sexual.
Is it true, though, that, as I've been reading lately, that one of the biggest problems that people have in their relationships now is a lack of desire from the man?
Well, it's interesting, as we said, as we alluded to a little bit before on the earlier segment, the sexual neutrality that's going on between people, because women are acting more male-like, men are acting more female-like, that takes away that positive, negative electrical charge between two people to have that intimacy and that lust and that desire. When you become both neutral in that relationship, you lose that desire. But also, as we get older, we start to lose testosterone and our hormones. Men and women both make testosterone, which drives that desire and that lust in our brain. And if we lose that, biologically that's gone. But then if you have that neutrality in the relationship, it's doomed.
So hence the saying, I love my husband, but I'm not in love with my husband. So how do you get all the arousal and the lust back?
Well, I'll let Dr. Morgan talk about how to get it back from a relationship standpoint, but from a biological standpoint, the thing you need to do is replace testosterone. We start treating women as early in their 30s, late 20s, as we lose testosterone prior to our estrogen. So if you have a hot flash, you are already testosterone deficient. And testosterone is what gives us that lust. It does many, many more things other than from a libido side, but it gives us that lust. But from a relationship, there's lots of things you can do there too.
Right. Well, we work with couples at Psychological Counseling Services to help them develop that emotional intimacy. It's learning how to communicate. It's learning how to connect from an emotional level. Because after the sex fades or the attraction starts to dwindle, you have to have a basis there and a core, and that's emotional intimacy. And many individuals don't know how to communicate their feelings because that's a foreign language. So we help couples and individuals become more comfortable with their feelings and then work on their communication skills with their partners.
Okay, so give us a piece of advice if there was a couple sitting here right now and that was their problem, their situation.
Well, first off, I would look to see what their communication style is. There's different levels. Communication style 1 being very surface talk, like, did you pick up the eggs, honey? Did you go to the store? Did you get the dry cleaning? And then as you look further, there's deeper levels of communication, and what you really want is to come from a place of open and honest and listening. Listening is a very big component of communication, and many people don't know how to be an active listener. They either are interrupting, or maybe they're being distracted and they're thinking about something else. So just working on those listening components is really key.
Or there's the silent treatment, or there's just yelling.
Right.
Right. So then how do you become, okay, now I'm going to be aroused because now you just yelled at me.
Right.
Yay.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Bob, remind everybody what your specialty is, too, because I want to get into that right now.
Sure. My specialty is working on issues related to child abuse, and that includes sexual child abuse. I think we all realize that it's a really relevant topic and throughout the United States over the last 12 months especially.
Yeah, but not just the Sandusky story. It's been relevant for as long as I can remember, and yet for as long as I can remember, it seems that the world has changed, and it's only a matter of my own individual perspective. I was allowed out all day long. I was allowed to walk around cities. My parents happened to travel a great deal, and so we would be in a different town every week or week and a half. And I would wander around as a kid and go to department stores and go to the movies by myself. And they were strict parents, and yet at the same time, somehow I never felt endangered, and they never felt that I was endangered. There were just as many predators then as now. Isn't that true?
It is, and I think that what we can do is look back into history and look at a couple defining moments as far as what changed our perception about child safety. And the Adam Walsh case is one of those things that we can look back and say that was a turning point in our society, where stranger danger became the utmost concern when it came to child safety. What we know is that is a horribly wrong perspective to take when you talk about child safety, especially with sexual abuse. We know that almost 70% of sexual abuse victims have been abused by a family member, that over 90% they've been abused by somebody that they know and they've trusted. So we've been teaching them, and it's not necessarily stranger danger isn't a bad lesson to teach, but we've been putting all that emphasis on that. And that's not the big problem when it comes to children that are sexually abused.
Lisa has triplets, 10 years old. Delightful kids, very communicative kids. Should Lisa already have started warning them, and how does she do that without terrifying them?
Absolutely, she should start. As soon as your child is verbal and has the ability to start communicating, we encourage parents to start having that dialogue with their children. And it doesn't have to be intimidating. It doesn't have to be over the top, and it doesn't have to be complex. It can be simple 5 sentences about feeling comfortable and what other people are allowed to do to you. When you do not feel comfortable, I want you to come to me, and I want you to be able to talk to me, and I'm going to believe you when you come and talk to me.
Well, and it's interesting that you say that, because my triplets are 10 years old, and how can you not avoid the Sandusky case in the news? And so they have started asking questions about him and the situation, and how do you best explain what he has been doing to these children?
Sure. I think the broader topic is that we're sitting here and my face has turned red a couple times, and we're just not comfortable as a country talking about anything sexually related. We're not, and that extends into sexual abuse. So right then and there, you're expressing that reluctance to, how do I do this? I mean, this is embarrassing. What do I say? We have that tendency to say, oh, we don't want our child to watch the news and see this. Well, this is such a great dialogue starter, and such a learning opportunity for you to talk to your children. We do such a great job in other areas of safety, or in health. We teach our children that eating Brussels sprouts is good for you. We teach them, we pass laws to say that they have to be in child restraint seats until they're a certain size. We really as a country have fallen down on that.
When we get back, by the way, I'd like to pursue this from a different angle, and that is there a difference in other countries where there's far more outward presentation early on for everybody in advertising, television shows, primetime television shows, about the realities of human sexuality? Does that have an effect on the numbers of sex crimes that exist in those countries, as opposed to the Victorian America that we live in? The country, in matter of fact, that is so proud of the Morning Scramble every day on AZTV. Hi, I'm Pat McMahon. This is the Morning Scramble. And if any of you are out there putting a gauze veil over the screen of the television set, you're the folks that we're talking about. You're the ones that probably need to open up and talk about this subject, just like we are. You are Lisa.
I'm Lisa.
And again, if you will, reintroduce yourself to the folks who just tuned in.
I'm Dr. Morgan Francis, and I'm a mental health therapist.
And I'm Dr. DeRosa, internal medicine, specializing in women's and men's health with bioidentical hormones.
Wow.
I'm Robert Bell, and I'm with Child Help, and I specialize in the area of child abuse.
Okay, and so right before the break we were talking about children and a little bit about the Sandusky case and how do you attempt to talk to your kids about sex. And Robert, I want to toss this to you. When it comes to children and sex, what is their perception of sex?
Well, so much of sex is a socially learned fabric, and so their perceptions are going to be tied very closely to the people that are closest to them, and that includes watching their parents, watching how affectionate their parents are, what they're exposed to as far as their environment outside of the home as well. So whether that's through television, whether that's through print media. So, there's a lot of different factors that do it. And then you also have the biological response, which is it's going to happen, and it's going to happen. We know that they're around that certain age. So, the combination of those, it varies. And it's really going to be dependent on the conversations, the dialogue that child's had with the people that are there supposed to be guiding them.
Well, and as far as exposure goes, it's like, I want to make sure that when my kids, and we are starting to talk about it, that they know what's correct.
Sure.
Because you're going to see it on radio or hear it on radio, TV, and of course they're friends, they're peer
And
pressure.
that you're not frightening them for their later relationships.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And also regarding their relationships, let's say a child is abused, can they rehabilitate themselves and live a normal life?
Sure.
They can.
Absolutely. One of the, getting to the first question is, what do you say when that topic's brought up? And we've gotten into a point where we talk about good touch, bad touch, and that can be dangerous as well, because sexual touch can feel pretty good, even when a child is not consenting to that. So that can get confusing for a child. We prefer to label it more good touch, bad touch, secret touch, where somebody's trying to tell you that this is a secret, this is between you and me, that this is something that you would want a child to develop a red flag about. But children are amazing. They know what makes them comfortable, they know what makes them uncomfortable, and they can recognize that. The roadblock that we often see in society is that once they feel that, and once they realize this doesn't make me feel right, that there's a reluctance on many different levels for many different reasons of why they don't talk about it. And the frightening truth with child sexual abuse is that if the child doesn't talk about it, we're probably not going to find out about it.
But if kids in Italy and kids in France, kids in Scandinavian countries and so on, are exposed much earlier than our kids are, and much more freely in advertising, billboards and so on, family programs, game shows in those countries are much more erotic than ours. What about the statistics for child abuse in those countries?
Well, when you talk about statistics, it's a little hard to compare one country to another, apples to oranges, because of reporting requirements that can be different from nation to nation. What we know in the United States is that most sexual abuse victims never disclose to authorities. A little over half of them never make a report with law enforcement, which means that we know that our own numbers here are vastly underreported. So when you have a culture or society that is more open about talking about it, it probably means that there are more cases reported in some of those countries. So it's going to throw off the numbers a little bit. It might seem that perhaps a nation much smaller than the United States might have similar numbers than what we have, but we know that that's not necessarily accurate when you talk about the total number of abused children.
Dr. Angela, Dr. Morgan, in Scandinavia, let's specifically talk about Norway and Denmark and Sweden. There are live sex shows as part of the entertainment that is available, just as theater is available and the National Circus is available. There is no law against pornography in those countries. There's zoning and restrictions as to where you can sell it and where you can buy it. Is that healthier than our society?
Well, I think we've largely made sex taboo in our country, and the more we say something's taboo, the more people are going to desire or want it, and there's also the opportunity to have lascivious behavior associated with that. It's healthy to have a normal sex drive and sexual health and sexual feeling. A lot of people are, unfortunately, in medical school, we're not taught how to deal with sexuality and how to express that with our patients. Even asking the questions, are you sexually active? Do you have a good sex life? Do you have a good libido? Those are often not taught to us. We express that in our practice daily. Certainly our parents can often give us feelings of guilt and all those things. It's to some degree to bring it out on the table and make it comfortable, talk about, free, and dealt with in a normal, healthy fashion, I think is good for people. And we've made it so, I guess, lascivious here that it's unhealthy, I think.
I would agree with her. I mean, I remember when I was in college and I went to Amsterdam in the red light district. And I was like,
One
oh
left
my
you out.
goodness.
Yeah.
And it was just overwhelming and surprising and shocking. And do I look at this? I don't know where to,
The houses of prostitution have windows
With the mirrors.
where
Right.
the ladies are beckoning
Right.
for you to come in, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so you were shocked.
I was shocked. I was overwhelmed. I didn't know what to do. And I agree with Dr. Angela. It's about talking about it. I think that we get uncomfortable as Americans being able to talk about sex and what do we say, and that's why I think this topic is so interesting. I mean, even today's show, it's sex today.
Yeah.
So I think that
I'm still blushing over here, by the way.
you know, so I think that there is, you know, this, you know, I don't know what I just talk about, you know, so I think there is definitely a difference.
That's funny at home this morning, because sometimes I'll tell Duffy what it is that the subjects are going to be and who the guests are. And had I said, "Oh, it's sex today," I know that Duffy would have said, "Honey, I'm a little sleepy. Why don't you go to work?"
Yeah, right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Or you're not going.
No, it really is one of those things that separates America with our 300 million plus people here.
I mean, the fact that people get uncomfortable saying the word vagina and penis. I mean, it just.
Well, what about that? What about telling our kids? Okay,
Yeah.
Is that what you were going to say?
Well, yeah.
Yeah. Does it have to be PP and Wahoo?
I think those are cute names, and certainly I think we always make up fun, cute names because that makes us more comfortable dealing with it. But get it out. It's a penis. It's a vagina.
And by the way, if I want to call it a Wahoo, it's my business.
Okay,
don't
whatever you want to call it is.
Hoo-ha versus Wahoo. In my house, Wahoo.
See, and I'm
is
still
fine.
blushing. I'm still, you know, like you said, I got to get over it.
Is it true that a man really honestly wants to marry a nymphomaniac who owns a liquor store? But that's just one of those. That's one of those jokes that's been around forever and ever and ever. Is it a woman with totally and completely unbridled lascivious desire? Is that an ideal mate for most men?
No, it's not realistic.
Okay.
It's not. It's not an ideal mate. It's a fantasy. It's not real.
It's also scary as hell. Guys,
No pressure. No
if
pressure.
you're thinking about that right now, you may have already missed that 9 o'clock appointment. It may be too late, but aren't you glad? This is the Morning Scramble. Pat McMahon, Lisa, and some fascinating authorities on sex. Okay, all right. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. That
exactly.
means don't do it.
That's right.
And all of us who had a Catholic education.
Exactly. You're sitting way too close to me, by the way.
That's right. That's right. Remember the prom?
Right.
Remember
Telephone book apart. And
Right.
he's a little too close right now.
The nuns with a tape measure.
My legs are
right?
crossed. I want you to know.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, all right. You wanted to say, as one of the official Catholics here,
Right, exactly.
about what your parochial education meant to you.
Well, yes, and religion. I mean, I was joking at the break that I have more Catholic guilt, more than you, than everybody in this room, just because of the way that I was brought up. And I was also brought up, well, you know, to fear God, but, you know, that sex was the taboo.
The Virgin Mary will weep if you do it.
Oh, and God is watching every single thing you're doing right now. So how does somebody such as myself get over that?
It's interesting when we talk about sexual desire and the things that can contribute to it. Baggage coming into it is really important, and religious beliefs and ethnic background and what that kind of embarrassment and guilt that you've been taught. It was interesting is I saw a patient about 3 weeks ago. She was in her 70s, Catholic, very staunch Catholic woman, and she came in and we were talking about her libido, and she had increase in libido after we treated her for hormone replacement with estrogen and testosterone, and now she had an increased libido, but the husband hadn't. And then we started talking about sex toys, and we started talking about vibrators and how she could self-pleasure herself. And she looked mortified, completely went white, mortified. She goes, well, I'm Catholic. We're not allowed to use vibrators. And
We're not supposed to do anything.
and she was, and she also went on to say that she's married, and that's not appropriate in her household. And she was so cute. She went to the front to check out, and I have a young gal who sits at the front. And she goes, "Did you know we could use vibrators as Catholics?" And she was mortified. But
Really?
and
Is there a rule about that? I don't recall.
it's in the Ten Commandments. It was the 11th. They got cut off.
Oh, no, it was the 11th.
Yeah.
Oh, gee.
And probably because it's primarily focused still after 2,000 years on procreation as opposed to pleasure.
Exactly.
How healthy is that, Dr. Morgan?
Well, you know, one of the things that we focus on when a patient and client come in is looking at their sexual history and looking at their feelings of guilt or shame, which can come from their religion and also can come from, you know, messages they received from mom and dad or experiences of sexual abuse that may have occurred earlier in their childhood. So as a clinician, I have to look at all aspects. Religion is definitely a key component.
And it's not just Catholics.
No.
Let's acknowledge the fact that we may have refined guilt, but it seems that there are a number of very strict religions who have very strict rules about that kind of thing, which brings us then to sex education. Sex education in public schools. We're not talking about Catholic schools or Hebrew schools or the Christian schools. We're talking about the public schools that, at least in Arizona, seem to emphasize abstinence. Good idea or bad, Bob?
You know, the good or bad about the abstinence is, you know, I really believe boils down to an individual, you know, opinion. One thing that I can tell you, and kind of working on that, the embarrassment and guilt that we're taught from the earliest ages, is how dangerous that is in the realm of sexual abuse. Sexual abusers are master manipulators, and that's how they gain access to children. That's how they convince parents that they're completely harmless, and that's how Jerry Sandusky went about his business, manipulating. I'm here to help. But one of the things that they'll do to that child who they're victimizing is that they will put that ownership for the abuse on them. And this is embarrassing, and you wanted this, and this is part of it, and you don't want to talk about it because nobody's going to believe you. So they put that on children as a way to control, because they know that if the child doesn't talk about it, they're not going to be discovered. So, you know, that's the danger, which means that we need to teach the children that it's not embarrassing to come and talk to your parents about sex.
But you're also talking about authorities in your life.
Sure.
You're talking about a beloved coach. We just had a story this last 2 or 3 days about a track coach, and it was only one of many stories through the years about coaches, about teachers, about authority figures, and
religious figures,
and military figures with the recruits. Unbelievable what is going on there. What do you do when you're talking about an authority? The child immediately says, "Hey, my mom and dad love me, but they're going to believe him."
Right.
Well, and you have to convince your child that that's not the case. You have to convince your child that if you come and talk to me about something of this magnitude, that I'm going to believe you. And that has to be stated in conversation, and it has to be reinforced throughout the development of the child. Because we know that sexual abusers take every form in the world, and that includes authority figures. So, you know, it really boils down to the child is the best protection for themselves, is that ability to recognize, hey, this person's trying to groom me, this person's making me feel uncomfortable, I need to tell somebody I trust.
Okay, and with that being said, back to the public schools, what grade are they talking to the kids about sex, and how graphic are they being?
I think it varies from school district to school district, but I can tell you right now that my daughter and I have already had a talk about that, and she's 5 years old.
And it's really not the school district's responsibility. I think we're taking that, it should be the parents. The parents are the ones that have the most effect here.
Do you both agree with Bob about the early age
Sooner the better.
communication?
I do, and I do think it's important to say vagina and penis. I do
Absolutely.
also think it's very, and I liked what Bob said about, you know, that's not just good touch, bad touch. It's secret touch.
That's wonderful.
And again, having the parent be a safe person for the child to come and talk to is so critical. And if the parent is uncomfortable talking about sex, then the child's going to be uncomfortable coming to you to talk about sex.
Some kids have been so uncomfortable, Lisa, and I know we've talked about this in other programs, that they get into middle school or high school, and they now feel that oral sex isn't actually sex at all.
And it's
Right.
okay.
Intercourse is the only thing that you really have to worry about, because it makes you pregnant, or there's STDs, not considering the STDs that are available for virtually
And
every
there's
other
young
kind
women
of
who are having anal sex now because they won't get pregnant, and it's another way that they can still have sexual
But where did that
contact.
come from, for crying out loud?
Well, I mean, nowadays, I mean, there's sexting, there's and young girls taking pictures of their breasts or parts of their body and sending it to their boyfriends or males in their school to get attention, and it's really objectifying parts of your body. And from a body image standpoint, that's really negative. It sends a message that I don't care or like the way that I look, and I look at myself not as a whole, but as parts of a whole.
And if you don't, as parents, take that role in really trying to help them with self-image and also give them the authority to talk about sexual response, this is what's going to happen. They're going to look to the public, and they're going to look for social media to drive those things, and they get negative reinforcement of that, and that's a symptom of bad communication at home.
Okay, well, and going back to the child talking to the parent about
With
it.
only 1 minute
Okay,
left.
what if the parent is not available, and we're talking authority figures, where does this child turn?
Well, you know, anybody that they can trust, and this is why we have mandated reporting laws in every state in the country, that if a child comes and discloses this, for instance, to a teacher or to their physician, that physician has not just a moral obligation, but a legal obligation to make sure that there's an intervention.
The fastest hour in the history of the Morning Scramble. But I guess hours do go by pretty rapidly, don't they, when you're talking about sex? We have been, and we're not going away. I hope you don't, because we have some closing thoughts coming up.
Morning Scramble is presented by Wildlife World Zoo and Aquarium.
Well, anytime the subject of sex comes up at my house, of course, usually the response is the same that we're giving you. Is it over? Yes, almost. We've only got a couple of minutes. And if you don't mind, Lisa, I would like to do a very, very quick question around the panel to find out if you personally, as specialists in your field, feel that virginity is overrated. Bob?
Well, my mom's not watching. I personally, I feel it's a little overrated, but you know I think it's an individual. That's something that really you figure out deep down within yourself.
And aren't you glad that it's over?
I'm glad that question is now done.
Angela.
I think virginity is overrated in the right population. Certainly when women are using sex as a control device or for ability for attention, as young teenagers often do, then it's wrong. But if it's in a loving situation, in a respectful situation, it's a wonderful way to express that intimacy.
Morgan?
I agree. I would like to again look at the emotional and the thoughts around the virginity. Look at also if it's a sexual anorexia, meaning I don't like sex, I don't like being touched, I don't want to be near anyone, and that's important to explore whether it's virginity or sexual anorexia.
And so, Lisa,
Oh,
it
boy.
comes down to you, the Catholic girl who no doubt was told everything hurts, it's dreadful and
Bad.
disgusting
Right.
until your wedding night.
Exactly. But you know what? All I have to say is love yourself. And you have to be happy with yourself. Because if you don't love yourself and if you're not happy with yourself, it doesn't matter, virgin or not virgin, you're not going to make anybody else happy unless you're happy with yourself.
Wow.
How
That's
was
the first time
that?
I've ever heard the closing things done so profoundly.
Thank you.
By a co-host, Lisa. I'm Pat, and this is the Money Minute.